Alright, so day one of BlizzCon has concluded. There will be one more day, but I kind of wanted to go over things that happened today as quickly as possible, since I'm sure people are wondering if they haven't been able to watch it all or read all about it or whatever. I want some summary. There also is some stuff that I know that is Shaman specific that you will not find elsewhere, except for stormwithandlava.com, of course, because everything is there. But on like WoWhead and stuff, they will not have this information most likely. Very little information, though, I'll give you that. But for one thing, this video is going to have a lot of information from the coming expansion, so if you were not looking for spoilers, please do not watch. That is your first and final warning, because, I mean, it's a discussion video about the new expansion, so lots of spoilers coming. So first thing first, the new expansion is kind of a big break from like the Legion and stuff. We're going to be more focused on the war between the Horde and Alliance. Jaina kind of comes back and is very different. She's very war-based now. I guess kind of everyone saw that coming. But it's going to be nice to have a little break from the Horde and Alliance, or rather from the Legion thing, because that was getting kind of old. And everyone kind of thought we'd have like a Void-based expansion, but it seems like that is not entirely the case. There may be some Void influence on it, but it's mostly going to be between the war and potentially like Ajara and stuff like that. So now for like the actual class information stuff. For one thing, class raid buffs are coming back. I don't know how many of you guys have actually played before they removed them. I think they removed them in the beginning of WoD. They will be adding back class raid buffs. Basically what this was like, for example, Druid would have Mark of the Wild, which increased your primary stats by like 4% or something. They're bringing these back for every single class. I'll quickly go over these. So Death Knights get a Vampiric Aura. Increases, well, it basically, yeah, increases your leech by 5% for everyone around you. Demon Hunters increase everyone around them's haste by 3%. Druids have Mark of the Wild, increases versatility by 3%. Hunters increase movement speed by 15%. Mages increase intellect by 5%. Monks increase mastery by 54%. This will, of course, scale with level. Paladins increase armor by 10%. Priests increase stamina by 10%. Rogues increase physical damage taken to the enemies by 5%. Warlocks increase magic damage taken by enemies by 5%. And Warriors increase strength or agility by 5%. Right now, Shaman doesn't actually have one, being the only class with that one, but that's probably just not being added yet. I really highly doubt that they would not give a Shaman one, and being the only class with that one. So far, there are only 2 buffs left untouched, that being crit and avoidance. So chances are we will be getting a crit buff, potentially avoidance, but I find that unlikely. So definitely expect like a 5% or a 3% crit buff coming for Shamans as a passive, or a usable buff that will be on the entire raid for you to bring some more utility or whatever. Unfortunately, it's a class-wide buff, so Resto Shamans will also have it, which basically means that for us Ellie and Enhanced Shamans, there's still no reason to really bring you for it, because Resto Shamans will certainly be in the raid at all times, just judging by every other expansion ever. But yeah, class buffs, pretty cool. Another very, very relevant thing is that they are doing another stat squish. They haven't actually publicly said it, I don't think, outside of like private interviews that weren't really private, I guess. But outside, they haven't said it on the full panels, but just from watching the streams and stuff, there is very, very obvious stat squish. Even eye level is actually being squished as well. Like a new 110 on the Alpha Realms was a 185 eye level, critting for like 5k. It was pretty small. Those are big crits. Usually like not even 1,000, it seemed like. And judging by what people looked at in the loot journal, Mythic and Taurus gear, which I believe is 860 on live, or rather 960, will be eye level 300. And legendaries, which are eye level 1000, will be like 335. Could be remembering this a little bit off, but I believe it is right around that range. So we're going to have a lot less health, they do a lot less damage. Keep in mind that this is for everyone, and mobs will be scaling down with us, so it's basically just making the numbers a little more manageable. We're no longer going to be doing 2 million DPS type of thing. I'm actually a huge fan of this. Some people don't like it. I understand why you wouldn't like it. But personally, I really like this. Makes theory crafting and everything a little simpler. Numbers a little easier to handle. Everything's just a little bit simpler. I kind of like it, but that's something they did before as well. I think they did that in Warlord of Draenor. So every 2 expansions-ish, and I'm sorry if you can hear my cat, damn it, shut up! The next like major thing that's worth noting is there's going to be what they're calling allied races, which is essentially sub-races, as you may have seen from the data mining. So far, they have released the races Lightforged Draenei, which is, of course, a Draenei High Mountain Tauren. They have released... well, this page is missing them, but I believe it is Void Elf and Nightborn Elf. Nightborn being for the Horde, Void Elf being for the Alliance, and of course Lightforged Draenei being the Alliance, and High Mountain Tauren being Horde. So far, we have some information on the racials and stuff, and it seems to be different from the main race that it is a sub-race from, but it is similar. And the classes that can play this race are not the same. Like, for example, the Lightforged Draenei, you cannot be a Draenei, or you can be a Draenei Shaman, but you cannot be a Lightforged Draenei Shaman for some reason. That can possibly change. There's only about 5 classes that can be a Lightforged Draenei, that being Warrior, Paladin, Hunter, Priest, and Mage. I don't really know why Shaman is not a part of this. I'm sure there's a lore reason somewhere, but again, this can all change. So far, we do have some of the racials. The only ones that have actually been publicly shown so far are Lightforged Draenei and High Mountain Tauren, as in like they've actually been played. It looks like the Lightforged Draenei racial ability is like an AoE damage and heal. Which might just be a damage, I'm not entirely sure. It's called Light Judgment, kind of like the Argus ability. A couple other random abilities is it has increased blacksmithing skill, and increased experience gain from killing beasts. It has like a ratio where if you die, you'll deal damage to everyone around you and heal everyone around you. That's where I got the heal from. And it also reduces holy damage taken by 1%, and my cat is on my desk now. Anyways, High Mountain Tauren, the main racial ability is Bull Rush, which is kind of like War Stomp, but instead you charge forward and knock down enemies, which is really, really interesting. It's a 2-minute cooldown. So the big problem with War Stomp is that the big use for it would be like in dungeons, right? AoE stun, but the problem is it has a damage reduction, not what DR means for that, diminishing return on other stuns. So if you use it, the next stun that's going to be coming out is going to be half the length or whatever. This is a knockdown. So I don't know if this DRs with stuns. It doesn't seem like it would, but at the same time they might do that just to balance it. But knockdowns are very, very different, usually. So if this is different than stuns, this is going to be very, very powerful in certain raid bosses and in Mythic Plus, of course, because it's an additional like 1.5 second CC, and the length it charges is actually quite large. It seems to be like 10 to 15 yards of a charge, maybe less than that. I'm not sure. I only saw it once, but at least like 10 yards of a charge on a 2-minute cooldown. It's kind of like Void Torrent, basically. It's a nice little AoE CC. Additional racials include mining skill increased and versatility increased by 1%, reducing damage taken by 330, and this will also scale with level. And of course, the immersion one, you have a chance to loot additional meat and fish. Excellent choice. So the big one here that kind of sticks out to me is, of course, Bull Rush, as I talked about, and the reducing damage taken by 330. Depending on how that scales, that could be really, really good, even for tanks or non-tank specs. Like, think about all the times in a Mythic Plus dungeon on Tyrannical as an LE Shaman, or something else squishy like that, like maybe even a Hunter, that can be fairly squishy, that you died with very, very little overkill because you just didn't have a cooldown. This can make that possibility much less, or make it require a higher level to kill you. So that could be something really cool. We'll see how it comes out in the end, because it kind of just depends on how it scales. Either way, interesting racials there. Very defensive racials. 2 additional sub-races that I forgot to mention are the Dark Iron Dwarves and the Zandalari Trolls. Dark Iron Dwarves being Alliance, the Trolls being Horde. I'm very interested to see some of these racials from these coming races. Specifically, I want to see if the Void Elves have Arcane Torrent, considering Arcane Torrent has been a huge point of contention between talking about racials because it's so powerful in Mythic Plus and raids and PvP. It's just a very powerful racial. Like, imagine if Void Elves get Arcane Torrent, suddenly Horde isn't this massively better race, or rather faction. That could be a really good way to kind of balance these if they kind of just gave the opposite faction racials very similar to the one faction has, to kind of split it up and even it out. we'll see if they go along with that. But Void Elves would make a lot of sense to have some kind of AoE silence like that. And of course, Dark Iron Dwarves will be the Alliance new race for Shamans, and the High Mind Tauren, and potentially the Zandalari Trolls, we don't actually know about that yet, will be the Horde races for Shamans. So one more big general thing that I'll go over is we are giving up our artifact weapons in place of, if I only got to listen to this once, I haven't been able to find like a restream, but we're giving up our artifact weapons in place of what I believe is an artifact neck. And this neck will be fueled with basically a new version of AP called, I think it's Azurite? I believe it's Azurite. And you will be getting traits on all of your pieces of armor. Now how this works is you have 3 rings of traits, where it'll be like the first ring is 2 DPS traits you can choose from. You pick the best one. A second trait is like another 2 DPS traits you can choose from, or it can be like healing traits, or it can be like utility traits. And the idea is that you're never comparing DPS traits to healing traits or anything like that, because otherwise the choice becomes too like, oh well, I want more DPS, I'm going to take more DPS. They don't want the choice to be super obvious. They want it to be more like playstyle based, like, oh, do I want Ghost Wolf movement speed, or do I want a slightly stronger Astral Shift? Like, it's going to be things like that, and I think that's kind of a really cool idea, as long as there are still some DPS increased traits on there, so it's kind of worth actually doing. So that's like the general basis of this. Every item is going to have different sets of traits, but every item ID is locked into one set, so there isn't like the Netherlight Crucible RNG. Like, imagine a Netherlight Crucible type of thing, but every relic, every one type of relic, or one relic, like let's say the relic from the last boss of Eye of Ajara, that relic, no matter what level or what level of Titan Forging or when it drops, it's going to have the same traits on it. Now, the relic from the Blackrock Hold dungeon is going to be the same way, but different traits. It will always have the same traits on it if it's that item. That's going to be for all of the items, though, not just relics or not just the weapon. So I think this is actually pretty cool because, for one thing, they're removing the RNG. You know what you're getting yourself into when you get an item. You know what the traits are going to be. You can already plan ahead what you're going to pick. And there's no RNG involved. You aren't going to get a Titan Forge item that has worse traits and be like, oh, I don't want to use this even though it has 10 more eye levels. That's never going to be the case. So that's a really cool system they have there for the lack of RNG, but still getting the progression feel on adding traits and stuff. And ideally they have fairly similar levels of traits. Like, every item shouldn't be like, oh, I want the shoulders from this boss because it just has 10 times better traits than everything else. Hopefully that's not going to be the case, we'll see. But this is basically the new weapon trait system. It's the new progression system, and the Azurite is going to be similar to AP in the fact that I believe you can get it from a lot of different sources. I don't think it's locked behind anything. Hopefully it's not quite as grindy as early Legion was. I think they've learned a lot. That'll be good. And one other important thing is legendaries. They have pretty openly said that legendaries are cool and all, but the way you got them was pretty bad in Legion. There's way too much RNG to get such a powerful item, such a significant item locked behind like complete luck, which is also tied with even more luck. Not ideal. I think we can all agree with that. So they haven't really said anything specific about how they're adding legendaries, if there's going to be legendaries or anything like that, but I can almost guarantee you it will not be the same as it is now. In fact, I find that to be a pretty good chance we won't have legendaries next expansion at all like it is right now, just because of the armored traits and stuff. So there's lots more general stuff to go over, but I don't really want to make a giant video going over a whole bunch of stuff that is very likely to change, especially when every other person who makes YouTube videos about World of Warcraft has already done so. I'm already kind of late to that. So I'm only going to go over the stuff that's relevant to me, and my own experience, stuff that I can actually comment on and have the slightest clue what I'm talking about. Like, I could talk about the fortresses thing, but I would have absolutely no idea what I was talking about. I'd be reading off of a script from WoWhead or something. So I'm going to stick with what I talked about for now, and now I'm going to tell you about the more Shaman-specific information. So for one thing, the class buffs, we kind of talked about that briefly. I am almost 100% certain we will be getting a crit buff, or a crit and avoidance buff or something, but almost certainly crit, because that is the only actual main buff that is left untouched so far. Avoidance has not been touched yet, but avoidance has a pretty low cap. A somewhat easy to reach cap, especially if you had a buff for it, so I wouldn't be surprised at all if they didn't add a avoidance buff to a class. what I personally want to see is Resto and Ellie Shaman, or Resto, Ellie, and Enhanced Shamans all getting crit, and then having Ellie and Enhanced both get Avoidance to have a little bit of extra utility for the DPS specs, since they kind of have become underrepresented when Resto Shamans are always so powerful. But I would not be surprised if they didn't do that. Hopefully they give us something, but moving on to the other Shaman information, there has been one change. One change. Pretty much every other class hasn't had any changes. We have had one change. On the talent tree, Lightning Rod has been removed. In its place is Stormkeeper. So of course we are giving up our artifact weapons for an artifact neck. I'll go over more of that if I already haven't in this video. I don't know where I'm putting things in what order. But we are replacing Lightning Rod with Stormkeeper. Stormkeeper has changed a little bit. It is a 1.35 second cast on a 1 minute cooldown. I believe you can cast this while moving, according to Storm at the Lava, Slenderman himself. And basically what this does is cause your next 2 lightning bolts or chain lightnings to be instant cast and trigger an overload on every target. So it is essentially a static overload times 2. You get 2 free static overloads, instant cast. It's basically Stormkeeper right now, but without the damage buff, and 1 additional static overload. Whether this will be an increase to what we have now, or worse, we don't actually know yet. Depends on how they tune it. And it's just like, using my head, I feel like it's going to be slightly worse. But it could even out just because the 2 static overloads. I don't actually know for sure. I haven't sat down and done enough of the math. But without the 200% buff, the static overloads won't be quite as juicy, but there will be 2 of them. So we will see how this turns out. It's a pretty cool idea because right now we have the 100 row is like, it's Ice Fury, the movement talent, the instant cast talent. Winston cast, I like that. Lightning Rod, the kind of AoE talent, more of like funneling damage for AoE, but basically it's used as an AoE talent. And Ascendance is the turreting talent that stands still and do tons of damage talent that basically go to single target. Now we'll be removing the funneling damage talent because I mean, honestly, it was used for AoE, but it really wasn't AoE. It doesn't actually do any AoE damage. It just contributes all the AoE damage into one target. So, in place of this, we are now getting an actual AoE talent, a very, very AoE-based talent, and it's going to be kind of really good in dungeons and stuff, and the one big downside is that we will not be able to have both Stormkeeper and Ascendance at any one time unless they add another class ring or something, which I find kind of unlikely. So, we won't be able to be kind of the master of all or anything, but if Ascendance or Ice Fury is really good at single targets, I wouldn't mind giving up the AoE to have really good single target, or give up the really good single target to have really good AoE, as long as we get to make the choice and have both options available to us. One other change is that so far, on Alpha, Chain Lightning has been changed a little bit. It now generates 4 Maelstrom per target instead of 6. This was something they tried to change before, and got a lot of backlash for it, ended up going back to 6. My gut feeling says this was not intentional. I believe this was more of a patching issue, like they accidentally brought in the build that had the 4 Maelstrom, because that was like the beginning of Legion. So it's very possible that this was not intentional and it will not stay. I wouldn't be too worried about it. We'll see as it progresses through the alpha and beta stages, and of course I'll be here to give you guys all that information as we go along. So one last thing I kind of wanted to briefly talk about is like the lore going into the next expansion. I'm really curious where this whole lore kind of came from. I understand there's always been tension between the Alliance and the Horde. I'm not super into lore enough to know all the details, but we're suddenly going from we were teaming up to fight the Legion. What happened? Did we just kill the last boss of Entorus and just kind of suddenly remember what happened on the Broken Shore? The last boss of Entorus dies, and then Anduin just kind of looks at Sylvanas like, "You bitch!" and they just start fighting completely randomly. Is that what happens? I want this more of a gap closer. I want to figure out what went down. I want them to kind of go into more detail on that. But again, I'm not really a lore expert, so maybe there is detail and I'm just missing it. Oh well. Hopefully we'll find out, because that actually does interest me. So there is a not-so-quick summary of the Blizzcon panels today. Whenever this video comes out, probably be yesterday, but recording this today at 2 in the morning, which is totally not today. But anyways, thanks for watching, guys. I will continue to update you as we get more information. So, yep. Stay tuned, and just a reminder, if you want more information right now, There's always WoWhead is always MMO champion and stuff that will keep you updated. And of course, for anything Shaman related, Storm and Lava will have that stuff up before I will. So you can check that out in the link in the description below. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.